Hello and welcome to Revenge of the Drive-In, the podcast where we watch, review, and discuss two movies randomly selected from a list of over 2,000. We are brought to you by the Grandma Sophia's Podcast Network, and this week's movies are The Rock from 1996 from director Michael Bay, and 2012/11's Cabin in the Woods from director Drew Goddard. I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined here by
Jim. Hello, everybody. Hello, Patrick.
This is our first non-Bond Sean Connery movie. That I know that's exciting for you.
Very exciting. This might be like one of Sean Connery's last actual movies before he kind of transitioned into retirement.
It's probably like his last, for lack of a better term, I'll say significant movie. Like in terms of it was a big hit. Critics for the most part liked it, I think.
I think like Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars.
Well, Roger Ebert, at that point, I'm sure could relate to a former great who's just kind of clinging to life at that point, of course. But no, I kid. But you've probably seen the movie Entrapment, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably the only one that likes that movie, but I like that movie quite a bit. That's in my incredibly biased opinion, that's Connery's last great movie, and it really isn't great, but I just watched that a lot as a kid. And
No. His last great movie is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
His literal last movie.
That made him quit acting. He was like, this is fucking awful. I hate every second of this. I'm done.
He had such an awful relationship with that director that I believe that director still hasn't recovered from. I believe he hasn't made a film since then also, so... The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it ruined lives, folks. But The Rock, to my knowledge, didn't ruin any lives, unlike Animal House last week.
Oof, yeah. Funny enough, I was doing a bit of research on this movie. The minimal amount of research that I usually do on these movies.
So a negative amount of research?
Exactly, yeah. I sat on my couch, I watched the movie, and then I had a nap, and that was it. Interesting factoid number 1. You and I recorded a... What's it called? A thing? A commentary track on Cold Pursuit.
Are you going with the William Forsythe connection?
No, I could have, but Cold Pursuit had a budget of $60 million. This large, loud, bombastic action movie had a budget of $75 million.
Yeah. And
I guess, like, you know, these two movies were made 25 years apart.
Yeah, inflation definitely plays a role there in Cold Pursuit almost having an equivalent budget. But just think of where this movie was filmed versus where Cold Pursuit was filmed in the middle of nowhere. This movie, we get that awesome car chase through the streets of San Francisco. Like, that's a ton of money was spent on that, I guarantee it.
Oh, it is.
You know?
Yeah, or it was, yeah. Yeah, well, I guess without further ado, let's get into it.
His name is John Mason, British national, incarcerated on Alcatraz in 1962, escaped in 63. There's no identity in the United States or Great Britain. He does not exist.
Secrets have a way of coming back to haunt you.
There's a hostage situation on Alcatraz. Hostage? 81 tourists. The Rock's a tourist attraction.
So, as you've already pointed out, it was directed by Michael Bay, which is why it's so fucking loud and ridiculous.
I don't have a lot of experience with Michael Bay. Obviously, I know his reputation because he's one of the biggest filmmakers around, and everyone, at least for a while, hated him. I think some people are kind of coming around on him now. He made the movie Ambulance a year or two ago, and people really liked that one.
Oh.
So I think there's definitely Michael Bay defenders out there. I haven't seen enough of his movies to either hate him or like him. But I know a lot of people that hate Michael Bay will still like this movie and still kind of acknowledge that, hey, this is pretty good. This is like the only good Michael Bay movie. I've heard that from a number of people. So,
well, I have some opinions on either the directing or the writing, but I'll get into that later.
There's a few moments, because, again, haven't seen a lot of Michael Bay movies, but I kind of know his reputation through osmosis. Obviously, he loves the explosions, loves attractive women, which there's not a whole lot of that in this movie.
I mean, Sean Connery's
sex
the most
appeal of Sean
person
Connery, exactly. But his apparent penchant for placing really dumb and juvenile humor is definitely in here, and there's a couple moments where I'm like, this is awful. It wasn't there wasn't too much of it, and overall,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it affected the movie too much as a whole. But like in those moments, I'm like, what is this? This is so stupid.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, well, anyways, this stars Nicolas Cage, obviously, Sean Connery, the late great.
Loaded cast.
Yeah,
We got
Ed
a lot
Harris.
of good. Yeah, Ed Harris is awesome.
We have Tony
always.
Todd in it.
Yeah,
and-
a way bigger role than I thought he would have.
yeah, I know, huge role.
He's like the number 3 villain, I would say, and he's like, if you look at the cast, like he's pretty far down there, so it's much bigger. He's listed lower than John C. McGinley on Wikipedia. He has a way
which is
bigger role than
interesting.
John C. McGinley.
Yeah, and I'm glad he's in this movie. I like him a lot. Also, David Morse is, I think, like the right-hand man of...
he's villain number 2.
Yeah, and he's great, too, in everything he's in.
Yeah, he's just a good character actor. He's a very good villain. I always remember him for Disturbia. But yeah, he's awesome. He's also, I mean, he's not always a villain, because one of his more memorable roles is Tom Hanks's prison guard buddy in The Green Mile.
But great actors. And again, like you said, loaded cast for this movie. Again, on a $75 million budget. Pretty impressive. But Ed Harris, he plays a fellow by the name of Brigadier General Francis Hummel. He's a Navy special ops guy who's...
Marines.
Okay, he's a Marine.
Yeah.
Who's disillusioned with
Navy,
the government.
There's a relationship there. Okay, I'm not. You're Canadian. You don't know this stuff. It's fine.
But yeah, he's upset with the American government. He's pretty disillusioned because he has been a Marine since like the late 60s. He fought in Vietnam up until...
He commanded people in Vietnam.
Yes,
He
exactly,
wasn't
yeah.
just a run-of-the-mill...
And he's lost like 80-odd people under his command. And because of all of the things he was doing in various theaters of war were so top secret. Whenever somebody died under his command, they were not given a proper funeral. They were left to rot. Their family was never really told what happened to them, and their family wasn't compensated by the American government. Mm-hmm. So instead of, going to, I don't know, like the Supreme Court or Congress or something, I don't know how you would appeal this, he decides he's going to steal 15 VX gas rockets from a Navy base and capture Alcatraz and point his rockets.
This is what you would do, right? You would
Yeah,
go
of course.
straight to Alcatraz.
Of course.
Right,
I mean,
now-
I think, yes, Patrick, I would aim a bunch of gas rockets at San Francisco, each one capable of killing about 70 to 80,000 people. And I think, you know what? I'll hold the American government and tourists in Alcatraz as ransom.
Yeah, 81 tourists, I think.
Yeah, and Ranger Bob or whatever his name was.
Did you recognize Ranger Bob, by the way? He's come up in 2 movies that we've covered.
I mean, I thought his face looked familiar.
He is Shrunken Meatloaf in Dr. Alien. He's Dr. Alien's right-hand man. And he's also a prison guard in Halloween 4 that gets his head bashed in.
No way. Dude, that's great.
Yeah, good for him.
Look at him getting these great roles.
Yeah.
These great
yeah,
15-second roles.
He's one of the best parts of Dr. Alien. He's very funny in that, to be fair.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's like the little, sexed up little...
Yeah, it's a major role. Definitely the biggest of the 3 movies we've seen him in.
Oh,
but
for sure, yeah.
I've got a few things to say about this movie. And one, this is going to sound like an insult, but I don't mean it as one. This is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen.
Yes, I 100% agree.
But it's dumb in like a fun way where it's just like I'm not really being asked to take this seriously. Mm-hmm. Like, why are we hijacking Alcatraz? Why are we using this bomb thing? Like, it's just all stupid and weird.
Yeah, or even
but then also there is this interesting touch to make Ed Harris not completely just crazy or evil. I mean, his logic is messed up, but there's a tiny bit of like a First Blood where we're trying to make him sympathetic in a way. Like, ultimately what he wants is only fair. But his methods of trying to get that are just like, what? And then, so he's humanized in a way that his underlings really aren't, and that's fine because it's a movie. But yeah, talk about a stupid movie.
Well,
but
also,
it's not bad.
I don't think we've mentioned what exactly he wants. He wants $100 million from the American government, from a slush fund that they have, a secret slush fund.
$1 million to each of the people who died, and then the remaining, or the families of those who died, and the remaining money for him to spend as he pleases. And I think he's told his men that they're each getting $1 million.
Yes,
so
yeah.
that's just the rest of them.
Yeah.
Because the guys following him are kind of just crazy people a little bit. I mean, they're all military.
Yes.
But they're ultimately, we learn, a lot more zealous about his crazy plan even than he is.
Yes, exactly. So while Ed Harris is stealing rockets and setting up an Alcatraz, we're introduced to Nicolas Cage, who plays a character named Stanley Goodspeed. He is a chemical weapons expert. But we're introduced to him in like the most insane way possible, where we see him spend $300 on like a Beatles album, and then
Meet the Beatles. It's like their second or third album. It's one of the early ones.
Oh, there you go. And then he has to like defuse a gas bomb in a in a metal and glass chamber in the FBI, in some FBI building. I don't know. And it's shot in a way that almost gives you a headache. Like, all the action in this movie is shot in a way that makes you want to vomit.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, because even I mentioned that car chase scene. It's awesome. It's still just... I don't really like a lot of the way it's edited. This scene here in particular, first off, vinyl wasn't really back in 96, so this is a really weird hobby for when this movie came out. Like, nowadays, like, I have albums on vinyl now. Mm-hmm. So do you, actually. But... You know, so this is like a weird thing for him to spend money on, I guess is the point. And it's still weird if it's $300 today. Yeah. I mean, I just got ripped off on the newest Beyonce album. I got that on vinyl, and it was like $40, which is a lot. But I'm like, okay, let me listen to it. And then it's 4-sided, so it's got 2 discs. But each side is like 3 songs, and it's like you could have made this on one. You could have made this on one. This could be a 2-sided album.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only reason you made it 4-sided is to jack up the price. It's criminal. it's worse than anything Ed Harris does in this film. But at any rate,
I'd be so pissed off if I'm honest, Patrick. If I got that, I'd be so pissed off.
Yeah, it's like, what is this? Like, this is a joke. It's 3 songs on a side. But yeah, so this scene that he's doing, the Nick Cage, he's doing his chemistry stuff. It's there to establish that he knows how to act under pressure, right?
Yeah, well, it's there to establish a couple things. He knows how to act under pressure.
Yes.
He's intelligent, and he's quick thinking.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
Well, but it also, like, I kind of wanted him to be a bit more of an everyman.
Yeah.
I mean, he needs to know, he needs to have the scientific knowledge, obviously, because otherwise there's no reason for him to tag along in this mission. But they make him like an action hero even in this like kind of opening scene with him, and it's like I don't think I would have written it this way. But the weird thing is,
for the rest of the movie, he's not played as an action hero. He's an action hero in the opening scene where he's introduced, and then the rest of the movie he's
he becomes one at like the very end. But at that point, you know, it's fair because he's
earned it.
Been assisted by Mr. Connery and everything, and it was just kind of a strange way to introduce the character.
That ties into something I have I guess one of my biggest complaints about this movie, and perhaps Michael Bay or the writing, I don't know. But everything is shown, but not really explained, if that makes sense. I guess there's like an old filmmaking adage kind of thing. It's like, it's better to show it than explain it in dialogue. You know what I mean?
You say filmmaking, really this is just storytelling, because this is true in novels and everything, obviously, yeah.
But all the stuff that they show in this movie is retarded. So let's start with Ed Harris. We see him put on his medals and his military uniform, and he goes to his wife's grave in the pouring rain. He's like, honey, I'm going to do this. And then we see him steal a bunch of rockets from a military base. One of his guys dies. His flesh gets melted off of him, because that's what these gas rockets do. Mm-hmm. But then as he's taking over Alcatraz, or right before he's about to, he goes up to these 2 little girls in like a class trip, and he goes...
Yeah, I thought those were his daughters or something, the way he talked to them. Kind of strange.
He gets down on one knee and he's like, hey girls, I need you to do me a favor. Tell your teacher that you need to go back on the bus and get out of here. So we're like, okay, so this guy's a good guy. Yeah. Even though he just ransacked a Navy base and stole a bunch of rockets and has this ridiculous plan. Okay, sure, whatever. I guess I'll go with it. So Sean Connery, his character's name is John Mason. When you're introduced to him...
I see what you... Yeah, because they do a very clear thing to... Like, he's not all bad either, even though he's a criminal.
Well, that too, but also when they pull him out of prison, like the camera focuses on like 2 books next to his bedside, and one is...
It was Shakespeare and The Art of War.
Exactly, and I was like, "Oh, fuck off! Go fuck yourself." Yeah. This is how you're explaining that Sean Connery, a former like SAS operative, is intelligent and well read. Go fuck yourself, Michael Bay.
Also, can we talk about how he's essentially
James Bond?
He's essentially playing James Bond because they even talk about the thing that he did that got him in prison. He was a British Secret Service agent, and the thing that he did that got him in prison happened in 1962, the same year as Dr. No. I feel like that's a very knowing nod, and I like that. I like that little touch.
Yeah, it's great. I really do like it. I wish this was kind of in the James Bond universe. It would be kind of funny.
It ends kind of like No Time to Die a little bit. It doesn't, but Nicolas Cage tells the guy that it ended very similar to No Time to Die. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So before we even get to meet Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage gets called in to San Francisco by the FBI. And we get to meet Nicolas Cage's girlfriend who's pregnant, and Nicolas Cage wants to marry her and stuff. And he's like...
The most half-assed engagement ever. Where she proposes, or I think she tells him that she's pregnant. He says something like, "Oh, he's not wild about having a kid," and then like 10 seconds later, she's like, "Will you marry me?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
He's like, "Well, I guess I have to. You know, I mean, I love you, and I'm going to love this kid, so I guess I have to."
You do not really get a sense that this is like a wonderful relationship, and these two should be married, or that the marriage will last. But whatever.
Also, this movie has one of the most awful sex scenes I've ever seen in a movie in my life.
Well, it sounds like someone hasn't watched a lot of recent Steven Seagal movies. Fully clothed Steven Seagal with a woman 40 years younger than him.
So anyways, the government calls in Cage. He's like, "Hey, you got to come to San Fran and help us with this VX gas situation." But as they're trying to figure out how to...
First of all, he is like an FBI agent, or like was, or something. There's like a weird...
No, he is. He's just... And like he did training, but he's just in like the chemical engineering department or whatever.
Yeah,
or
but
like
he's not a field agent, but he did apparently train for that a long time ago.
Yeah, for like 3 weeks or something. They mention later in the movie.
It's as much time as it takes Sean Connery to get out of bed in 1996.
Oh, no.
I like how often you see him lightly jogging around the island.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Old man jogging.
I was surprised how much of that they showed, because usually, like, if you got, like, an old actor and he's going to do action stuff, you shoot around it.
Well, there's a bit in the movie where, you know, he has to, like, roll through a bunch of fire and spinning blades like it's out of a fucking video game. And I like he puts, like, a knit cap on his head. I'm like, oh, yeah, if that catches fire, that's sticking to your face. Good job, Mr. Connery. But also...
Well, it's for the stuntman.
Exactly, it's for the stuntman who's rolling much faster than Sean Connery rolls out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
You know?
That scene reminded me a bit of Last Crusade, like only the penitent man shall pass, kind of like where he has to go through like a trial thing. I don't know. It's just not really, but whatever.
Jehovah starts with an I.
Nicolas Cage doesn't have an H.
The FBI realizes, hey, we need Sean Connery to infiltrate Alcatraz, because Sean Connery's the only person who has ever escaped from Alcatraz successfully.
Yeah.
But he's not known. Like he's essentially what am I trying to say?
His identity
he doesn't exist.
His identity's been erased. He's just been imprisoned for decades. Apparently he's escaped not only from Alcatraz but from other prisons,
like San Quentin and stuff like that.
FBI director Jim Womack, who's played by John Spencer, aka Leo McGarry from The West Wing, and of course we'll see another West Wing alumnus in The Cabin in the Woods. He is this like corrupt asshole who just doesn't like or trust Connery for good reason, but you know, it's largely because of him that Connery officially doesn't exist.
Exactly, yeah. He's been put in prison because back in like 1962 he stole J. Edgar Hoover's microfilm files on every U.S. secret from the alien landings at Roswell to the real person that killed JFK. That's what they say.
Yeah, it took us a long time for them to get to that detail because he's kept secretive for most of it. We just know he did something, but for most of the time we just think, oh, he's just a criminal, right? It's probably 2/3 of the way in the movie that they finally reveal that, oh, he was a British spy and he stole all the stuff from J. Edgar Hoover. He stole all the information that J. Edgar Hoover had. He probably stole his panties.
And he was caught at the Canadian border.
Those Mounties.
But he's hauled out of prison, and the FBI tries to coerce him into helping them. They're not really explaining to Sean Connery what's going on, though. And then again, they pretend to release him from prison if he helps them.
They give him a pardon
and then,
if he agrees to help them, but then they also tear up the pardon
exactly.
the second he's not looking or whatever, you know.
But Nicolas Cage gets in and he starts promising Sean Connery, yeah, we'll get you a room at the Fairmont. We'll get you a cup of coffee. We'll get you whatever. Come on, just help us. So Sean Connery gets taken to a lovely hotel, the Fairmont, and he gets fed and he gets a haircut.
Gets to shower.
Yeah. Yeah, and he gets a haircut from a lovely gay man.
Yeah, this is the worst stuff of the movie. There's such a juvenile, like, oh, it's funny because he's gay.
It is, though.
It's so... No, it's not, though. I mean, it was bad.
It is bad. It's that sense of humor that died out about 10 years ago, you know?
Yeah, you don't... Maybe Michael Bay would, but I think just most people wouldn't have this type of character in a movie. Like, do you remember Rush Hour 2?
One of my all-time favorite fucking movies. Yeah, and the suit scene? Yes.
Yeah, the scene in Las Vegas when they go to get Jackie Chan a suit or whatever, they're meeting with Jeremy Piven and some other guy who are very clearly, like, exaggeratedly gay.
Yes,
and the joke is that they're gay and they talk kind of funny. And Rush Hour 2 was too much. This scene reminded me a lot of that scene in Rush Hour 2. And also, doing the score.
Hans Zimmer.
Two people, Nick Glennie Smith, who I've never heard of, and Hans Zimmer. And there were numerous moments in this movie that really reminded me of the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay. I have a bone to pick with Hans Zimmer. I think he's the biggest fucking hack on the planet.
I've heard that from a few people, actually, and I don't really know why. Like, a lot of people think he's, like, amazing, and then there's a lot of people that, like, say he's a fraud who doesn't even do his own scores and stuff. I've heard
if you
both.
Watch any fucking movie, Patrick, made before Pirates of the Caribbean, and Hans Zimmer is doing the score for it, you will hear an almost Pirates of the Caribbean score.
You know what the weird part about that is that, you know, the Pirates of the Caribbean theme, that's like a super famous theme still. The original Pirates of the Caribbean movie, The Curse of the Black Pearl, the score is not actually by Hans Zimmer. And that music, that Pirates theme, has been associated with Hans Zimmer because he did the score for all the sequels, but the original score for The Curse of the Black Pearl was by Klaus Badelt, he's also a German guy.
Sounds like Hans Zimmer's pseudonym or something like that.
Yeah, well, he is a different person. I did click on that to make sure it's not a pseudonym, but I'm sure he was probably like Hans Zimmer's protege or something. But I thought that was interesting that so much of this sounded like Pirates music, but like, wait a second, he didn't even technically do the Pirates score. He probably had a big influence on it, especially because he did the sequels. But
there's a video, it's at like some awards show, and a woman walks up to Hans Zimmer who's sitting down at the piano, and she goes, "Oh my god, you're so amazing." And he's like, "Yeah, well, you know, I just kind of do this with the keys," and he just starts playing like some random, terrible, out of tune music. And the woman's like, "That's amazing." He's like, "Yeah, it just came right out of my head right now, you know, yeah." And she goes, "That's so amazing, Mr. Zimmer." He goes, "Yeah, I mean, some call me a protege, and back in the 70s, and now I'm the master." And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're just dribbling the keys.
Again, I don't have this disdain for Hans Zimmer that you apparently do, and some of my friends do, but Hans Zimmer's scores tend to be very maximalist.
Yeah.
And that wears on you after a while. Like, you know, it can be good. I thought his work for the Dune movie was really good, but you watch a movie and it's like, oh, it's a score by Hans Zimmer, and it's just like loud and big, and it fits a Michael Bay movie, to be perfectly fair. Mm-hmm. But it can kind of just get tiring.
Yeah, no, again, the score in this movie is fine. Like, you're not listening to you're not watching this movie for the score.
No, you're watching this for sexy Sean Connery.
Oh my god! I have interesting factoid number 2 coming up later.
Oh, there's a gay panic joke about Sean Connery being raped in prison. There's a joke about that. Thank you, Michael Bay.
You're exactly, and that's what I want to talk about. But we'll get to that in a bit. Going back to this gay man, one of the best lines in the movie. He comes in and they're like, "Are you the barber?" And he says, "No, I'm the stylist." And they're like, "He's the barber. Send him in."
He does a little like a no, like a darling. Like
and does like a little flourish with his hand, you know?
Yeah. Not that you can see me, but I was doing the thing with my hand. Yes, I was doing that. Can you see me? Is this camera on?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Oh, I should probably put clothes on.
But yeah, so Sean Connery gets his hair cut, he gets cleaned up. And then, what's the FBI director's name again in this movie?
John Spencer's the actor. I don't remember. Let me look. Womack.
Okay. Womack?
Jim Womack. I like how from Alcatraz, by the way, Ed Harris dials one number and is connected directly to the FBI director. They didn't even put
great.
him on hold or anything.
I know.
It'd be one thing if they were buddies and he's like calling his cell phone or something, but no, he like gets connected to Langley or something. I don't get it, but that's...
Well, and again, this movie just kind of does things to make the plot work. Even though, like,
sure,
you know, it doesn't really make sense, but it continues the plot. After Sean Connery gets all cleaned up, he throws Womack off the roof of the hotel, and he's dangling him from like a cord, and then he hands Womack off to Nicolas Cage, and then Sean Connery escapes into a big black Hummer and takes off.
And the escape is made possible by him distracting all the other FBI guys with
food.
with snacks, because when he was taking a shower, he called room service, and somehow that worked. These guys suck. Yeah, but he gets in a Humvee. Nick Cage hijacks a Ferrari.
One of the coolest chase scenes ever, because you're going down the San Francisco streets.
It's a bit strong. It's a cool chase scene, but I mean, you're right. The good use of the San Francisco, like you see the cars kind of going up in the air on some of those hills and stuff. That's always good.
Well, there's also like every trope, every like chase scene trope known to man in this, where as soon as Sean Connery takes off down an alleyway in his Hummer, like 10 seconds after he gets it, he knocks over like a fruit stand.
He almost hits an old lady taking her time crossing the street.
Yeah, he drives into
old
a water
lady,
truck.
She's probably 10 years younger than him. But,
I know, yeah.
You know.
Yeah. He drives into a water truck. He drives through a bunch of cars. He drives over cars.
And he's doing this to try and block the cops that are chasing. It's not like he's doing this because he doesn't know how to drive.
Yeah, because he's driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah, I was about to say that, yeah. But he's doing this to create some space. But it's fun. It's exhilarating. The editing is a little...
hectic.
Disorienting, but, you know...
My favorite part about this chase scene, though, is shows like this trolley, and then like this black trolley conductor guy. He goes, "Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing?" And then it cuts to Sean Connery, and he sees an old woman in the road, and he swerves, and he hits the trolley, and the guy goes, "Holy shit!" Like it cuts back to the trolley guy. He's like, "Holy shit!" It just comes off the rails and starts sliding down the street. It was like 5 seconds of normality for this guy on like a Monday morning, you know?
Well, and he doesn't even get it worse because he gets out of the trolley after it's capsized, but other people are like thrown from the trolley while it's moving.
Yeah, he's screaming, and he's like, "Jump out of the trolley, save yourselves!" I forget how, but like the trolley gets caught on fire or like hits a bunch of cars and it gets caught on fire, and then it explodes and shoots straight up into the air.
I also like the bit where Nick Cage, as he's trying to swerve and avoid all this stuff, he sets the airbag off, and then as the trolley is sliding towards his car, thus going to make it explode, because that's how vehicles work in Michael Bay movies, he has to get out of the car, so he has to shoot the airbag, which is fun.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before in a movie, where someone is trapped by an airbag and they have to shoot it.
I also like when he gets out of the Ferrari and it gets crushed by the trolley. There's like this like San Fran stoner dude with like a dirt bike or something. And he's like, "Whoa, man, your Ferrari got crushed." And Nicolas Cage goes, "It's not mine. And neither is this, FBI," and just throws the kid off the bike. But Mason started this, Sean Connery, started this whole crazy chase just to have a bit of time with his daughter, who we learn is like 40 years younger than him. And he knocked up this poor girl's mother when he escaped.
After a Led Zeppelin concert.
Yeah. When he escaped from prison one night. And
she's dead now. The mother's dead. She was assassinated at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
But yeah, so he just wanted to kind of touch base with his daughter, and instead of being hauled away in chains by the FBI, Nicolas Cage kind of does him a solid. And he goes, "Oh, your father's working with the FBI, yada, yada, yada. Come on, Mason, come with me." And Sean Connery thanks him for being such a cool dude.
This is really the first hint at like these guys might be able to kind of work together.
Yeah, but then after this for 20 minutes, Sean Connery's just shitting all over Nicolas Cage and everything he does.
a little bit. It's not quite. It's not as bad as the interrogation scene.
Oh yes, yeah. That was rough.
Which we didn't mention this, but there's a really strange part of that interrogation scene when the interrogation's over and Sean Connery breaks the one-way mirror and looks in and sees that it's Womack.
"I knew it was you. you fucking
Yeah.
shit, or something like that.
Yeah. that was strange. That was, again, going back to, this is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen. I've never seen someone just break an interrogation.
Dude, it was awesome, though. It was awesome.
And nothing came of it, too.
No, exactly.
You'd think he would have seen that the pardon was ripped in half or something, because that's the scene when they rip it in half, but he didn't notice that yet.
No, there's too many glass shards in his eyeballs to see that.
And the one you abandon becomes your only hope.
You go talk to him.
Me?
Yeah.
Hiya. I'm an agent with the FBI. I'm Stanley Goodspeed.
But of course you are.
So now that they have Mason and Nicolas Cage on board, the FBI is getting prepared to infiltrate Alcatraz. They have to take Mason, though. They weren't originally going to. They're going to throw him back in jail. But they have to take him because he pretends he doesn't remember how to make it into the prison itself. And Nicolas Cage originally wasn't planning on going, but they were like, no. You have to disarm these rockets. Which, first off, you think they would be sending him to, like, neutralize these, like, the gas things, which are, like, they look really cool. They're like these balls on a rope. Yeah, instead of neutralizing the gas, Nicolas Cage has to go and neutralize the rockets by taking microchips out of their guidance system so they just crash into the ocean and presumably kill all the fish.
Yeah, I agree. There's probably a better way to actually disable them, but whatever.
They get on a helicopter, they drop into the ocean, they swim through the drainage pipe, and they come up into a locked room where, like I mentioned earlier, Sean Connery lets everybody out of this locked room by rolling through a fire maze.
This whole sequence here reminds me a lot of Aliens. The guy in command is Michael Biehn, who's in Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if he's the one in command in Aliens. He might be. I think he's the one in command after a few people die. But everyone's feed can be seen over at the FBI headquarters or whatever. So it's Womack and it's whatever William Forsythe's character's name are like, they're like watching everything.
And much like Aliens, they're also helpless when bad things happen. Like, for instance, all of the Marines break into the shower room and they accidentally trigger, like, a motion sensor.
No, damn it, these are the SEALs.
Sorry, the SEAls.
The Marines are the bad guys, the
You're right,
SEAls
you're
are the
right.
good guys.
Oh, the SEAls break into the shower room through the sewers, and they accidentally trip a motion sensor that one of the Marines, John C. McGinley, sets. They get ambushed by Ed Harris and his crew. Ed Harris, you can tell, is kind of like trying to talk everybody down, and the head, the head guy of the SEALs,
Michael Biehn.
He's trying to talk Ed Harris down, but then like a brick falls, and then everybody just starts shooting at each other. In this,
and Ed Harris is trying to get a ceasefire immediately, but
but
basically everyone here is killed. It's just three people, Nick Cage and Sean Connery, who are still underground, and then some other guy who eventually goes up during the middle of this fight and gets killed.
Yeah, gets shot in the head and then falls back down the ladder.
A noble effort, though.
I guess so. Sure.
Ill-advised, but noble.
Yeah, some might call it stupid, but, not me. Because after everybody gets killed, Mason just decides to flat out leave, to just escape and go on the run, but Nicolas Cage he's trying to convince him to stay and take out the rockets and all the baddies. And because Nicolas Cage is talking to Sean Connery so loudly, the Marines find them in the sewers and try to blow them up. Connery and Cage stumble upon a stash of, I think, 12 rockets, and they neutralize all of them by taking the microchips out, only after neutralizing two Marines with a knife to the throat thrown by Sean Connery, and then an air conditioner to the head shot by Sean Connery.
Yeah, Sean Connery does basically all the fighting. Nick Cage is, though he has some training, he's mainly just a suit.
Yeah. And then the movie becomes like a weird minecart adventure movie, briefly. Yeah,
this was strange.
They kind of fall into a shaft and into a minecart, and then the Marines start chasing them, and they just have like a wacky minecart, mineshaft shenanigan adventure.
Where Sean Connery sets someone on fire, which is
John C. McGinley, and then he drowns him.
I always love a good fire stunt.
And, the Marines are shooting these steel minecarts and not killing Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery, who are hiding in them.
And Nick Cage kills his first man. He saves Sean Connery's life here.
He does, exactly. And then Sean Connery at this point was like, I can trust this guy. He's still a little bitch, but I can trust this guy.
Yeah. But he's my little bitch at this point. Also, you said we were going to get to it, but we skipped the Sean Connery.
Oh, I thought it came just after
raped
this.
raped in prison joke. No, it's when the other people are still alive. But,
okay, yes.
Well, that other line too. But
okay, the raped in prison joke. Let's back up to that. Well, hold on. Now, before you say anything, I have interesting factoid trivia number 2.
Is it that Sean Connery was actually raped in prison?
No, Sean Connery. This movie came out in 1996. Sean Connery was in his mid-60s.
Mm-hmm.
In 1989, he won Time Magazine's Sexiest Man of the Year, and he still holds the record for oldest, sexiest man of the year.
What? But why? Why did he win that?
I don't know. People thought he was super sexy. So maybe the prison rape thing, maybe there is no, he was right. People are super into him. They might not be now.
Not in 1996, though. Well, he's dead now, if you're into necrophilia, maybe. But, yeah, so the line is, he says something about, how he's enjoying this. And he's like, well, it's better than my average day, reading philosophy and trying not to get raped in the showers or something. And he's like, it's a little easier than it used to be. Perhaps I've lost my sex appeal. And it's
and I was like,
why are we joking about this? This is weird. This is stupid.
I know. And then,
I did laugh, but I'm like, this is very stupid. I more laughed just because it's like, they gave 65-year-old film icon Sean Connery that line to read,
But do you feel like he kind of enjoyed reading it out loud? You know
what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was improv too, for all we know. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, your favorite Sean Connery line also happens before this, because it happens when there's some kind of conflict between the two of them. They're the only two heroes surviving, but
yeah, and then
Connery's like, listen, if we're going to do this, you gotta be ready.
Yeah, he essentially says, you gotta man up. Stop being such a little bitch. And Nicolas Cage says something to the effect of, well, I'll try my best. And then Sean Connery says, your best? Losers always whine about their best. Winners go home and fuck the prom queen.
Very, very strange line. Is that a famous line, or is that only famous to you? Because you've brought that up to me frequently, but I don't know if it's just a line that stuck out to you.
I think people know the line. I think it's a pretty odd line.
It is a very odd line, sure, yes.
But yeah, that's the best. Winners go home and fuck the prom queen. But eventually, Connery and Cage decide to split up, because Nicolas Cage has to find the last 3 rockets, I think.
Yeah, 3 more rockets. He talks to them on the PA, or maybe gets them on the walkie-talkie, but he's threatening one of the hostages at this point.
Yeah,
and says, "Why you need to just come back and give me your the microchips or whatever, right?"
Yeah.
And so Connery decides to go and distract him or delay him while Nick Cage goes and finds the other rockets.
I think Nicolas Cage finds one, and he manages to disarm it, and he breaks a microchip, but he gets captured. He gets into a bit of a tussle, and he gets captured by 2 of Ed Harris's guys. Sean Connery kind of just gives himself up to Ed Harris. He doesn't really surrender. I assume he had some other kind of a plan.
I think this pretty much goes to the plan that he intends. I think if he can talk Ed Harris down from doing this, obviously, it's worth a shot, but I think he's expecting to be thrown in a prison cell and just escape again, like he's done so many times, And
I guess something else that we didn't mention was they have a couple shots of a countdown where Ed Harris has given the American government 48 hours to bring him 100 million. And by the time that they get dropped off in the ocean to infiltrate Alcatraz, I think they've got 15 hours left. So when we next see Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, they're in separate prison cells, and they only have 52 minutes until Ed Harris fires off these rockets into San Francisco. And Sean Connery ties a bunch of bed sheets together and lets himself out of his cell, and then lets Nicolas Cage out. And Sean Connery, again, decides, I'm fucking over this. I'm just leaving. I'm gonna split. See ya. And Nicolas Cage is again trying to convince him to stay, and Nicolas Cage gets captured at gunpoint again, and Sean Connery returns and saves him again.
Yeah, a little repetitive at this point.
The countdown timer runs out. The American government is asking for another hour, and Ed Harris goes, no, I'm going to fire a rocket. And all of his goons under him kind of pressure him into firing a rocket. You can tell Ed Harris
he's still really very hesitant, yeah.
So he fires a rocket towards a stadium in Oakland or something, right?
It could have been Candlestick Park or something. Yeah, it could have been the Oco Coliseum. I don't remember.
And then at the last second, he diverts the rocket and it crashes into the ocean. And all of Ed Harris's underlings, which by this point there's a handful. It's Tony Todd, some other guy, and
David Morse or whatever. Oh, the real crazy guy. I think that guy's in Shawshank, isn't he?
I have no clue. I don't think I've ever seen that guy before. Well, Morse and Harris have a bit of a disagreement, and Morse is like, look, ask for more time. Everybody's falling apart here. You're falling apart. Ed Harris is disagreeing with him. And then Tony Todd and his crazy buddy kind of stage a mutiny.
Tony Todd has a good point where he's like, we're not soldiers. We're the second we signed up for this, we became mercenaries. So it's like there's no going back from this. And he's 100% right. I mean,
absolutely.
What's Ed Harris going to do if there isn't a mutiny here, you know?
And throughout the movie, Ed Harris is comparing himself to the founding American fathers. And
yeah, because they also committed treason.
But shooting toxic gas on a bunch of civilians is a little different than, staging a revolution against the British monarchy. I don't know.
You're right. It's far less justifiable, or far more justifiable, excuse me, because the American Revolution wasn't against the monarchy primarily. That was just it was good PR from Thomas Jefferson and company, because everything they complained about was not the fault of the king. The king cannot raise taxes. The last time a king raised taxes, he got fucking beheaded.
That is true.
Yes. So, I mean, it was their gripes were with Parliament. But they recognized also, hang on, this sounds better if we say it's against an unelected government official. Brilliant PR move.
Brilliant PR move.
Ed Harris could have used some of that PR, some of that Thomas Jefferson PR. Let's be honest.
Yeah, well,
because you can't really see how he's getting people on board here, even though he does have somewhat of a thing.
He's got his own little following,
Also, he's a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, he's a little bit similar. Not that Michael Bay would know this, but he's kind of similar to Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was, like Ed Harris, was a great American hero. Mm-hmm. There was like a lot of reasons why he turned sides, but among them was he felt his men weren't properly compensated. And I don't think it was in the case of like we didn't get military funerals. I mean, what the hell was a military funeral back when there was barely an organized military? But it was more like, no, my men who are still alive are just not getting paid what they should be when you're sending us on these dangerous missions. So I'm just going to go fight for the British, I guess.
Ed Harris, he loses his PR campaign here to Tony Todd because they get into a bit of a firefight and David Morse is killed and Ed Harris is shot in the gut. And Sean Connery comes in with a submachine gun and is like fighting off Tony Todd and everybody else. And Nicolas Cage pulls Ed Harris out and he just starts yelling at him, "Where's the last rocket? Where's the last rocket?" And Ed Harris says it's in the lighthouse and then dies. So Sean Connery is off doing his own thing, and Nicolas Cage runs to this rocket, and he successfully takes the microchip out. But as soon as he does that,
the order must be a little bit wrong too, and I'm not sure where
the second rocket,
where we made a mistake. But there was a rocket that was inside that he fired at Tony Todd.
No, that's coming up. That's the last rocket.
Oh no, is that in the lighthouse? Okay, maybe you're right.
Yeah, because that's the best death in this movie.
It's so stupid. It's like, hey, do you like the Elton John song Rocket Man? And then it's such like an obvious setup, and it's like, Arnold could have delivered this with a bit more class. But I'll take it. It's so dumb.
Yeah, well, like the rocket hits Tony Todd in the gut and carries him out the window. And then he falls and lands on like a dilapidated fence, and it impales him.
I also like when Tony Todd was confronting him, he just put down the gun and takes out his knife and is like, here. It's like, you know what? I trust Tony Todd with a knife. I think he knows what he's doing in all those horror movies and stuff. He looks better with a knife in his hand than a gun anyways. Or actually, he looks best with a hook, though, like in Candyman.
Yes, yeah. So there's a few guys kind of milling about, and again, Sean Connery's out and about killing people, and Tony Todd's buddy, the crazy guy, starts chasing Nicolas Cage throughout this lighthouse. And again, Cage takes out the microchip, and he drops one of like these gas capsules, and eventually this bad guy's on top of him, and Nicolas Cage shoves his capsule in his mouth and pops it. And the guy dies
This is, I think, is the Shawshank guy, but I'm not sure.
And he dies a slow, painful, awful, terrible, horrible death. But I guess we also forgot to set this up because there's so many things going on in this movie.
Well, hang on. There's also, I know what you're going to get to. You're going to get to the airstrike, but Sean Connery's big climactic fight here is with a guy who's like, oh, screw you, you English prick or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, did I tell you that my family was Irish or something? And then Sean Connery ends up overpowering him and like choking him with the chain. And for some reason, they didn't have him say, like, I'm Scottish, you know? Like, why wouldn't you have that? It was so obvious to just let him say that, like, as he's killing him or something.
Exactly. Well, also, earlier in the movie...
Maybe Michael Bay doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, maybe that's it, right? Like...
Connery, as famous as he is, he's like the most famous Scottish person ever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Why don't you give him that triumphant moment of being like, you know, have like in Skyfall when the guy that was supposed to be Sean Connery, the old Albert Finney guy, the old groundskeeper, when he shoots that guy and he goes, "Welcome to Scotland."
Yeah.
You know, give Sean Connery a moment like
it.
that.
Yeah.
Huge missed opportunity. If you're going to have a guy have to point out that he's Irish and he hates the English, give Sean Connery the chance to say, I'm not English, you fucking idiot. You know? It's just like, come on.
Yeah. Can't you hear me? Yeah, I like after they filmed that scene, Michael Bay is like, where Sean Connery's like, you know, I'm Scottish. He goes, Scottish, English, what's the difference?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, move on, we're getting to an explosion.
That man knows his audience.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of near-ish the beginning of the movie, they were talking about if people couldn't disarm these warheads, these rockets or whatever, they were going to have to send in a bunch of jets to drop these, like, untested thermite bombs on Alcatraz to destroy the rockets and destroy the poison.
Which would get all of the mutinous Marines killed, but also kill all the civilians. Yeah. Which at this point, it's like, whatever.
Yeah, fuck
Sorry,
them, who cares?
Ranger Bob, or whatever your name is.
Yeah. Another thing, too, was they explained that if the mission is a success, you got to light these green flares. So it looks like the mission isn't going to be a success. They scramble these jets, but right at the last second, you know, Nicolas Cage disarms the last rocket, and he lights these green flares after he's stabbed himself in the heart because he was the poison got on him or whatever, I assume.
Is that what that was? Yeah, because that was strange, because it looked like he just stabbed himself, and I assume it had something to do with the poison, but...
Yeah, because if you get too close to the poison...
It didn't really translate in film that way.
Yeah, earlier they were given needles, and it's like, if you get close to this poison, you got to stab yourself in the heart to save yourself, because you got like 20 seconds or something.
I guess I forgot that line.
So
I forgot that line because of the prom queen line and all these other weird lines that stuck
about
out
being
to
raped
me.
in the bathroom. Yeah,
exactly.
So Nicolas Cage lights these flares, and it's awesome slow-mo kind of thing of Nicolas Cage waving these flares. All these jets are flying under the Golden Gate Bridge. Just as it looks like everything's going to be called off, which it is, the lead jet accidentally drops his payload. And he goes, oh shit, I've already dropped it, no! And like there's this huge cool thermite explosion on the island, but luckily, because he dropped it so high or whatever, it missed. It hit the backside of the island. None of the civilians were killed. Sean Connery wasn't killed. Nicolas Cage wasn't killed.
None of the civilians are killed, but we never really verify that. When they ask Cage, like, was anyone killed? And he's like, no civilians were harmed. It's like, he never checked.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like, nah, they're fine. Whatever.
Maybe they all starved to death in the 48 hours.
I know. They were in there for 2 days.
Like those, we never see them again. Those people might be dead. We don't know.
But the best part is, you know, when, as you kind of pointed out earlier, Nicolas Cage is standing there. The FBI guys come up and they're like, "Where's Mason?" And Nicolas Cage says, he was incinerated. Yeah, and blown out to sea. And what's his name? William Forsythe, is that his name?
For the one with the mustache, yeah.
He kind of gets it. He's like looking at Nicolas Cage. He's like, yes, I see. He was incinerated and blown out.
Yeah,
to
he's
sea.
like, oh yeah, that does happen when Leo McGarry from The West Wing is like, wait a second, that doesn't just happen. Forsythe's like, no, yeah, it happens. Like it happens.
After they're satisfied with that response, Nicolas Cage meets up with Sean Connery, and Sean Connery's like, well, this is it. This is where we part ways, man. I'm fucking getting out of here.
This is before that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm seeing
yes.
There's so many crazy things going on in this movie. I can't keep track of it all.
I thought this was going to be like a Shawshank moment because he tells him, like, he's like somewhere Kansas, like Fort something Kansas.
Yeah.
And I thought he was going to tell him, like, hey, meet me there. But no, he's telling him that's where the film is, or the microfiche.
Yeah.
That's where J. Edgar's panties are.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like, it's in... It's just a great scene. Yeah, then Sean Connery disappears, and the movie really ends with Nicolas Cage and his new pregnant wife.
They also have a beautiful English bulldog.
Oh, dude, he's great. Yeah, do you think they're going to name him Sean? He's not a Scottish bulldog, damn it.
Yeah, because he was English. Yeah, exactly. Maybe Nick Cage doesn't know the difference.
Nick Cage is running out of this little church in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, Kansas, with a leg off a pew, and in it is like all the microfilm of, just all the stuff that's like that the American government has wanted to hide from like 1930 to 1960 or whatever. Mm-hmm. It ends with Nicolas Cage saying, "Honey, do you want to know who really killed JFK?" And then that's it. That's The Rock. So Patrick, what'd you think of The Rock?
I want to discuss the ending.
Okay.
Who do you think killed JFK in the context of the movie? Was it Connery? Maybe.
I don't think
Probably
so.
not. I just think like it'd be kind of fun if James Bond killed Kennedy.
At first I thought that's what they were like leading to. Like the first time I ever saw this movie.
I think I read somewhere that Kennedy loved the Bond movies. Like he obviously only saw the first two. So that'd be kind of fun if they're like, oh, by the way, James Bond killed him.
Dude, that would be great. Well, and also, too, as you mentioned, like, it's never stated that, I mean, obviously, for legal purposes, he's not James Bond, but he totally is, right? Like, there's no way that whoever was writing this movie didn't
mean, he's a British Secret Service guy. They're trying to imply it as many ways as they can. With the 62 line is definitely a bit more of a subtle one, but, like, if you know your James Bond history... 62 is the first James Bond film, the first time Sean Connery played that role. Yeah, I mean, I just think that's fun,
Yeah, but what's your takeaways from this?
As I said earlier, I think this is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen, but I also don't mean it in a bad way, because I was entertained. While it's certainly not a movie to make you think, I like that they do the thing with Ed Harris where he's not completely just an evil bastard. Mm-hmm. Tony Todd's kind of an evil bastard, which, Tony Todd in real life, or not in real life, but in all of his other movies, I guess it fits. He's probably a wonderful man. I don't know. But, and, like he's definitely got some underlings that are just evil. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he's trying to de-escalate. He doesn't want to, he feels bad that they had to kill all these guys. And he also doesn't really want to fire the rockets, but he was also... And this is just like a movie thing. Like, I guess he was just dumb enough to believe the American government would actually give him the money.
Yeah.
I like it. I think my favorite scene is probably the car chase. Just the sheer amount of dumb explosions, and it looks so much better because it's on the streets of San Francisco, which are unusually steep, and you get some fun just action stuff there, and obviously the streetcar. All the gun action... none of it's spectacular, but it's fun, and I like the Nick Cage Connery dynamic. I like their little back and forth. I think it gets a little repetitive towards the end because as you were pointing out, there's basically 2 times Sean Connery leaves, and then he obviously comes back each time. You think they should have like had this moment where like Connery doesn't want anything to do with them, and then Nick Cage saves his life in the Donkey Kong minecart chase. And then they should probably be good from there on out, and they're still not. Like, we still have the kind of backtracking later on. But I like those 2 actors together. I think they're a lot of fun. Connery's definitely my favorite actor in the movie, not because it's a great performance, but just he's fun. I like the interrogation scene with the 2 of them, too. I like, he's like, we got to get you a haircut. Because at the time, Connery has this really long hair. And he's like, why, am I out of style? And he's like, well, not if you're in one of those, like, grunge bands in Seattle. And then, which, by the way, in 96, I think that's an out-of-date reference in 96. I could be
probably
wrong, but... And then so later on when he's getting the haircut from the gay stylist, he's like, ooh, they've done a number on you. And he's like, it's a grunge thing. So there's, I don't know. Connery is just really fun in this movie. And I think that's probably what you're going to say because you're just you're a Connery nut.
I am. I love Sean Connery. I used to have a photo of him up above my desk, but I threw it out recently, unfortunately.
Too many stains on it.
Exactly. How'd you know? But no, I also love how angry he gets in this movie at people. And by angry, I mean, I like how much he swears at people in this movie. He's calling people like fucking assholes and pieces of shit. Yeah, because
how many rated R Sean Connery movies have you seen? Not too many, because, when he was a younger man, obviously, they didn't swear in movies like that. And then, like, Indiana Jones, and, it's PG-13. Yeah, I haven't seen him in too many R-rated movies, so I agree. That was kind of fun. And, we all know Scots people love swearing, so it's it's only fitting.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, English people.
Yes, English people. Yes, let's not get them confused. I'm not going to say it's a fantastic action movie. I think it's exciting.
Sure.
I might even call it exhilarating in some scenes.
Yeah.
It is a big, dumb, loud action movie, like I said at the beginning of this.
Sure.
It's just fun to watch.
There's a time and a place for big, dumb action movies. I'm not above it. You're not above it.
No.
Nobody should be above it if it's done well enough and it has good enough actors and stuff, and I think this movie pulls that off.
Yeah, now, is the action great in this movie? Not all the time, but the actors are great. No. The story is fun. The setting is very fun. Dilapidated Alcatraz.
Yeah, that goes a long way. It really does. Also, Cage, nothing amazing, but he has some good, weird line deliveries there, where if you're like a big Nick Cage fan, you'll get something out of his performance here,
yes,
definitely.
Yeah. Well,
if you enjoy the weird Nick Cage, this is far from the weirdest Nick Cage performance. Not even as out there as Face Off, obviously, but, he still gives you a little bit there.
Yeah. But no, I love this movie. I think it's a fun movie to watch. This movie also is kind of like the last of an era for action movies. It's stupid, full of explosions, full of ridiculous weapons. Yeah, like...
ridiculous weapon, just the bombs. I mean, the guns, they're not using,
No, yeah, you're right.
Guns from Doom or anything like that,
The weapon of mass destruction is stupid. It looks
sure.
It looks
and it's
wonky.
straight out of a Bond movie, to be perfectly honest.
It is, yeah. And I feel like you don't really get action movies like this anymore, or you haven't for at least the last 10, 15 years. Now it's all Marvel shit,
Yeah, but it's Marvel or it's Mission Impossible. There's not much of a middle ground.
But this
every 3 or 4 years we'll get a James Bond movie. Otherwise it's Marvel and Tom Cruise.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But this one we had two greats, Sean Connery and Nick Cage, and other greats all thrown into the mix. And
yeah, I like the bridging of the eras, and this is really that's what Last Crusade is kind of all about, is how can we have Indiana Jones interact with an elderly James Bond, and that's largely the appeal of that movie. But at the same time, elderly James Bond, he's a comedy character in that he doesn't really do a lot of action scenes. He unfolds an umbrella and scares some seagulls into a plane. That's kind of like his big action scene, right? This movie, he's an old man, but he's got action stuff to do, and we're pairing him with a young modern action star. Nick Cage, he was like the action star of the mid to late 90s before maybe Keanu Reeves and some others took over. It was just bridging that gap of we're bringing in an elderly washed up action hero. We're pairing him with this younger guy, but we're still going to have the elderly guy be the more badass one, which is kind of fun. It's like the opposite of Last Crusade.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun, and they have that mix. It's not all elderly people. It's not the Expendables, where it's just kind of pathetic and sad, or the Steven Seagal movies. but it's
and sad.
So I just like that. I think this movie. I don't think there's a single performance in this film that I'm like, oh my god, this is great. But I think the actors do kind of make it in the way, and maybe it's just more than the performances, like the casting. It's just good casting to get all these people, get all these credible actors to play the villains, whether it's Tony Todd or David Morse or John C. McGinley or obviously Ed Harris. I mean, we've got the West Wing's chief of staff as the head of the FBI. That's awesome. So yeah.
And I guess before we move on, because I don't really have anything else to say about it, I enjoyed this movie a lot. It's one of my favorite action movies.
I don't love this movie nearly as much as you do, but I like it.
Yeah.
I would watch it again. This isn't going to be one of those action movies that I watch time and time again by any means, but I enjoy it. I do not regret having seen it again, and it's no Face Off, but it's good.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't enjoy this movie. This is a pretty crowd pleasing film, I think.
Oh yeah, it's a crowd pleaser, sure.
But before we move on to our next movie, Patrick, I was just thinking, you were talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and what I brought up earlier was that Sean Connery won Sexiest Man Alive in 1989, and that was the same year.
Fresh off of that movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Women were watching that movie, and it's like, oh, Harrison Ford, pretty good looking, but that Sean Connery, his dad, man. I mean...
That's always the way it goes, isn't it? The son's attractive,
was
the father's
John Rhys
more
Davies
attractive.
number 2 in that list?
I'd put him up there.
John Rhys Davies is sexier when he's a dwarf, though. Let's be honest. Okay, so let's talk The Cabin in the Woods. Like I said earlier, 2011, it was at the... I'm going to draw attention to this festival because I just hate the name of it. I hate what it is. You don't even know what I'm talking about, but it's just fine. But it was shown at the 2011 Butt-Numb-A-Thon.
What?
Which, well, there's a few things to say about this. First of all, this was held in Austin, Texas, I believe at the Alamo Drafthouse. Harry Knowles, who is, or was, or is kind of a movie critic. He ran a movie news website. He's one of the weirdest looking people I've ever seen, and thankfully he's been canceled for some accusations against him. But I never knew much about this guy, but sometime after he was canceled, I read a movie review that he wrote of some, I think Guillermo del Toro movie. I can't remember which one it was. And he should have been canceled just for that. That was the worst thing I've ever read. It was like, I guess he was like friends with Del Toro in real life, and he talked about like, oh yeah, this is like watching a good friend of yours just like fuck a hot woman, and I'm like, this is a movie review. What is this? It was the strangest thing I'd ever read.
What?
But yeah, Harry Knowles, genuine creep. We should have known just from how he wrote, apparently. But yeah, he's canceled. But he hosted in Austin, Texas for a few years the Butt-Numb-A-Thon, which was a movie festival that was like, it was supposed to be like, I don't know, it was 24 hours straight of movies, but like,
yeah, I get it. I
butt
get the
numb
joke.
because you're sitting down. But like, it's just, I hate that name, and I hate, because Cabin in the Woods is a pretty good movie, but we have to say that it premiered at the 2011 Butt-Numb-A-Thon. But also worth bringing up Harry Knowles because Joss Whedon is also canceled now. He is the co-writer and the producer of this film.
Why is he canceled? What did he do?
He's just an asshole to people. No, really, I think I don't think there was anything specific about him being. It's weird because his ex-wife tried to get him canceled, like kind of in the early days of the post-Weinstein era.
Okay.
And her reasoning was that he cheated on her, and then I think people kind of collectively looked at that and said, like, I mean, that sucks, but that's not really what we're trying to do with this canceling people, right? And, you know, it's kind of like a lot of people cheat. But then a few years later, more information came out that, like, on the set of Buffy, he apparently, in his writers' rooms, was just awful to women, and he liked making them cry at their writers' meetings and stuff like this. And then also there was like some weird stuff about some of the actresses that worked on his shows, which they were like told like, stay away from him, he's a creep. Like there was an actress that was like a 16-year-old girl when they started shooting Buffy, and she had like something in her contract to like never be in the room with him alone or something. So it's like, yeah, just weird stuff. Joss Whedon is a terrible person, but I wanted to bring up, and it's a long time coming for us to actually get to The Cabin in the Woods, but my favorite Joss Whedon trivia or whatever is he had a big magazine feature after he was canceled. This was supposed to be like his kind of comeback, his defense, if you will. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was that, but then a lot of it was just so much weirder.
Okay.
And there was something, and apparently this has been said before, but I remember reading this article. This is his defense, and it seemed to almost imply that when he was a 5-year-old kid, he like murdered a neighbor or something. It was very strange.
What?
When he was a kid, there was a neighbor kid that used to come over to their house, and then one day he was found drowned in like Joss Whedon's family pond or something. And this article that I was reading, which was issued by Joss Whedon's PR team, did not make any effort to say Joss Whedon didn't do it. It was the strangest thing ever. What? And I hope someone out here who's listening knows what I'm talking about, or can find that article and read about it, because it was very strange.
I think I've just found the article.
Okay. Well,
all it says is, it's titled, Joss Whedon finally has something to say.
Yeah, that's probably it. I don't remember that. I mean, I read this a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through to try to find him murdering his neighbor story.
But yeah, so everyone hates Joss Whedon now. Everyone loved him for a while. I never really did. I never saw Buffy, but I just, like, I've seen Joss Whedon in interviews, and he just seems like really smug, like, asshole.
Hold on, can I pause you there for a second?
What's that?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop laughing.
Okay. Did you find the murder story?
Yeah. I'm going to read you this little paragraph. When he was 5...
This is becoming like a conspiracy theory podcast now, because I was talking about Chevy Chase murdering someone last week.
Yeah, let's roll with it. So it says, when he was 5, a 4-year-old boy, the son of family friends, disappeared on his parents' property upstate. Eventually, his body was found. He had drowned in the pond. Years later, as a teenager, Whedon remembered he had called the boy over to the pond to play with him. After getting bored, he had walked away, leaving the boy alone by the water. I didn't think it was my fault, Whedon said. I knew I was 5, but it just doesn't... But it doesn't... But it doesn't just disappear as a thought. It took him another 30 years, he said, before another thought dawned on him. Even after the incident, his parents never taught him to swim. There was no structure, he said. There was no safety. And that's the end of the quote.
Oh, shit. You're murdering children on your property.
You called a friend over and drowned him. You piece of shit. That's why you're canceled. Allegedly.
Yeah, well, the weird part is that's not why he was canceled. But yeah, so Joss Whedon, there was certainly a span of time where everyone loved him. I know when the first Avengers movie came out, pretty close to the time that The Cabin in the Woods got its wide release in the U.S.
Yeah, they were both 2012, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a huge year for Joss Whedon. And I think at the time I had never heard of him, and then the Avengers comes out, I saw it, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that Joss Whedon man, his dialogue, and it's like, what? Like, was I supposed to know who this guy was? And then it's like, oh, he was I never saw.
Oh, he was a murderer. Yeah, you're right. His dialogue.
Well, yeah,
is good.
He was as a child. We'll have to check on the statute of limitations on that, But yeah, so, Joss Whedon thankfully did not direct this film. He was involved in the writing. He produced it. But yeah, this film is directed by Drew Goddard, who I guess was kind of a Joss Whedon protege. He worked on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel. Oh, he wrote Cloverfield.
Okay.
And then he's directed a few films since this, including one of my favorite movies the last 5, 6, 10 years, The Bad Times at the El Royale. He directed that. I really like that movie. Well, I guess to fully transition from Joss Whedon murdering a child when he was a child to The Cabin in the Woods, let's say maybe it wasn't murder, maybe it was ritual sacrifice.
Oh.
Everybody ready? The show on the road!
Doesn't even show up on the GPS. It's unworthy of global positioning.
That's the whole point. Get off the grid, right?
Hello? I'm thinking this thing doesn't take credit cards.
Sign says closed.
We're looking for, what's it called?
Tillerman Road.
Not to get you there. Getting back. That's your concern.
The Cabin in the Woods opens with dark, ominous, drawings over the opening credits and like creepy horror music. But then the first scene proper is just boring guys in shirts and ties in an office, right?
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be very just the contrast there. And it is funny. And overall, like, my favorite part of this film is these two guys. It's Richard Jenkins, who plays Sitterson, who's a technician, and Bradley Whitford, the guy I mentioned from The West Wing, who played Josh Lyman there. Here he plays Hadley, another technician. They're just a lot of fun together. They're both super sassy, sarcastic, kind of like weirdos, and they're fun. But the two of them are just talking really like mundane, normal stuff. And then they get some news that something in Stockholm failed, and therefore everything or whatever in their company is relying on them and Japan. And they get in a golf cart, and they're just driving around. And then it just, the title comes up like really, really bluntly, and just says The Cabin in the Woods. And it's just a really fun opening because it's obviously not at all what you would expect from a movie of this title.
When this movie came out, I had a very good friend who went to see it, and we were supposed to see it together, but I dropped out. I had to do something. And I spoke to my friend the next day. I said, how was it? He goes, oh, I hated it. And I said, why? He goes, it wasn't really a horror movie. And then I didn't...
Which it isn't really. I mean, I think it's...
Yeah, it's like really a sci-fi I guess.
It's more of a comedy.
Yeah.
You know me. I know I mentioned this. I don't really like horror comedies. I tend to, because in many cases they don't take the horror seriously enough for me to really enjoy them. Like, I think Scream, is a good example of that. Is first and foremost a good horror movie, and it has comedy on top of that. This movie, to me, I think is just a good comedy that has some horror stuff that, for me, doesn't work that well as a horror movie, but I still think the movie's funny, and I like it.
Well, exactly. Well, because it's so interesting. And this opening scene leads into my favorite part of the movie, which is all the interesting stuff happening in this organization.
Yeah, I love when they're taking bets. That's probably my favorite scene.
Yeah, I like that too, yeah.
But yeah, no, you talked about wanting to see this when it came out. Was this advertised as like a straight horror movie? Because I could see that pissing people off.
I believe it was.
Okay. Yeah, I would guess if the trailer probably didn't have anything with Bradley Whitford or Richard Jenkins, I would guess it was all Chris Hemsworth and his buddies, right?
Yes, yeah.
So after this introduction to these people, where we don't really know anything that's going on with them. We don't know why the movie's opening with them. We don't know if anything they're talking about is important. We meet our kind of main teens. They're all college students. Dana, played by Kristen Connolly, and Jules, her friend Jules, played by Anna Hutchison. They're getting ready to go on a trip to Jules's boyfriend's cousin's cabin. And Jules' boyfriend, of course, is Kurt, played by Chris Hemsworth. And he shows up there with his friend Holden, who Dana has not met before, but it's very obvious that Kurt and Jules are trying to set her up with them. This is how most horror movies open, right? Or I should say, you have that opening stinger, right? You have someone getting killed, and then you meet all your main characters. And I've seen so many of them that have this like exact scene, basically. Hellfest, which we've covered on this podcast, has this exact scene where they are getting ready in, I think it's an apartment, and they're talking about how the main girl, how they're trying to set her up with this other character that's going to be there. Yeah. And it's the same exact thing. So if you don't know this is a horror comedy at this point, you're probably watching this going like, oh, come on, I've seen this before.
But that's the point.
Yes, but they do establish a few moments even early on where it kind of is a comedy, because you see Chris Hemsworth, he's an athlete, right? He's the dumb jock. But then he talks to them and is like, oh, are you reading that book? Like, oh no, you actually, that's, the professor covers all that. You actually want to be reading this. And it's like, okay, so he's not a dumb jock. That's just what he looks like. He's really a smart guy. And then, so, they're playing with those kinds of, I guess, tropes.
Yeah.
Before they leave, before they get in the RV, they are joined by their final person,
Shaggy,
who I think a lot of people would say is the best character of the film.
Yeah.
I think it's Hadley and Sitterson, myself. But
I agree
this guy's
with you,
good.
But he's third best, or second best, I guess.
He's the best of the teen characters. This is Marty, a stoner, who we first see driving along, smoking from like a thermos bong, like a bong he's made out of, or maybe a thermos that he made into a bong. Like, I don't know what this is, but it's amazing. And so it's set up like, okay, Dana is, if not a virgin, at least, the innocent girl, right?
She's virginal.
Kurt is the dumb jock, although we already know he's not really dumb. Jules, little flirty, but she's also seemingly in a committed relationship with Kurt, so, like, you might be tempted to say, oh, she's, like, the slut or the whore, but also, like, is she really? We don't really know about, and then Marty's the stoner, obviously. We don't really know anything at this point about Holden, other than he's obviously the love interest for Dana.
Mm-hmm.
So as they drive off in their RV, Marty does, he's smoking and he's talking his conspiracy theory stuff about how the producer of this film killed a child when he was 5 years old. He says, society needs to crumble. We're just too chicken shit to let it. So he has a lot of this, like, the world is fucked up kind of dialogue, and which is a theme of the movie. He's stereotypical, like, kind of paranoid stoner who thinks he's a lot deeper than he is, but in this film it turns out that he's actually just as deep as he should be. I mean, really. But so the RV stops at your average creepy gas station. The actor, whoever that guy is, I think I've seen him in something else. He is perfect as creepy gas station owner. They call him the
Harbinger.
The Harbinger, they call him that later on. There's a very funny scene when after they get some gas and he says some weird things to them. He doesn't go full on Crazy Ralph, but, you know, he's enough to make them kind of unsettled.
Yes, yeah.
Later on, he calls the security team at this facility and tells them what's going on, and they Bradley Whitford puts him on speakerphone so they can make fun of him because he's giving the really cliche movie dialogue about, like, oh, you know, all the...
He's doing it in character, right? Whereas, like, all these guys, they're just office workers and, like, field agents, right, for this organization. And he could have called them up and been like, hey, the kids are on their way. You know that, though, but I'm just letting you know they're on their way.
Yes.
But he's like, the lambs are being led to the slaughter.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, exactly. He answers, he talks in character, almost like they hired him because he is that guy from a horror movie.
Yes,
he's not like it makes sense that he pretends to be that guy when he's talking to the teens, but no, apparently he just is that. All these people now in this security room with all the television screens and stuff like that, watching everything that goes on, they're just normal, everyday office guys, a little sassy, a little Bradley Whitford. This is not too different from the character he plays on The West Wing, who was incredibly sassy and incredibly sarcastic, and I've talked to a lot of people who hate him on that show because he's just too much. I think he's awesome on that show. I agree he's too much, but I think he's fun as a television character. I think he's fun as this movie character here. I know Richard Jenkins is in Step Brothers, which I've never seen, but for the most part, I think Richard Jenkins... kind of a serious actor, so seeing him kind of goof off in this movie is quite fun, although anyone who's seen Step Brothers would probably be like, oh yeah, he's not a serious actor, so maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But
going back to the scene that we were just talking about, the best part about it is that he's doing this character, and then he realizes he's on speakerphone when everybody's snickering at him.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? Did you put me on speakerphone? I mean, that's not very nice, you know. I'm just trying to tell you what's going on.
No, I didn't. Oh, wait, it looks like I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but like he completely comes out of character right back to his normal Mordecai
and then
self.
they do it again. They do it twice on him.
Yeah.
It's quite a fun scene. So at this point, we learn a little bit more about what goes on at the facility. They're obviously monitoring all this stuff. We don't know exactly why, but we know apparently they've hired this guy to creep them out. And we also see that the main character is going into this cabin that they have to drive through a rock tunnel, like through a mountain. That tunnel's supposed to be sealed off, and that there's a force field like around their area because we see like an eagle fly into it and just die.
Yes.
So they check into their creepy cabin. Of course, it's a creepy cabin. It looks exactly like the Evil Dead cabin, basically. Holden finds out that when he takes down like a painting, he sees that he has like a window into Dana's room, and he does this kind of like, oh, I kind of want to watch her change, but I know I shouldn't. And he shows everyone that like, okay, this is what's going on. It's like the interrogation mirror that Sean Connery breaks through. It's a one-way mirror, right? Yeah. It's a window on one side, it's a mirror on the other.
There are so many similarities between our two films.
Holden and Dana end up switching rooms because he is the good guy, you know, he's the love interest. He's like, hey, I'm sure you don't feel comfortable with this. Like, I would put the painting back up, but like still, you know, and they switch. But then she doesn't put up the painting for a while, and she sees Holden take off his shirt and has that conflict within her before she realizes, oh, I actually should not watch this. So she puts the painting up and then realizes it's a creepy painting, so she actually covers it with a blanket.
Now, hold on, before you continue, another similarity our movies have, Chris Hemsworth was also Sexiest Man Alive in 2014.
Okay, not at the age of 65, though.
No.
Yes, okay. That makes sense. That makes a little bit more sense than Connery getting that in 89. One of the funniest lines of the movie is when they're looking at this mirror interrogation room, and Marty has this line. He's like, well, you know, it's the Pilgrim days. They had to build their own interrogation rooms back then. Or something. He has some line like that.
That was good.
Marty was a lot funnier than I remembered him.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Even though he is a stoner, they don't go for like stoner comedy with them. They just kind of make him funny. Just generically kind of, not fish out of water. How would you describe it? He's kind of aware that they're in like a horror movie situation.
Yeah, and he seems to be the only one that's self-aware about it.
Yeah, self-aware is the better way to put it, yeah.
We're not just seeing horror tropes in this movie. This movie's all about the horror tropes. That's the joke of the movie.
Sure,
That's like the backbone of this movie, really.
what we eventually learn, and we've already picked up some bits of this, obviously, but what's going on over that facility is they are recreating all these horror tropes with these other people for purposes that we still don't know yet. But this movie basically kind of offers an explanation for how stupid things happen in horror movies, basically, right?
Yeah.
Because they're like, we need to make sure these people are dumb. How are we doing that? Jules just got new hair dye. She's blonde now. They actually put like a chemical in her hair dye to make her dumber.
Yeah.
And that's pretty clever. If you want to see another movie that kind of does that, or it does it in less, I would say, a comedic way, but it also does this thing where like it kind of serves as an explanation for other horror movies, for like how things happen. Check out Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It's like a faux documentary style of like a guy who wants to become Michael Myers and who's like got this team of filmmakers like filming his murder rampage. They do a lot of really neat things of like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be noticed by the final girl, but then you're supposed to disappear by the time she turns away and then looks back. And they kind of show how you do that, how that makes sense in a real movie universe, because it doesn't, quite frankly, make sense when Michael Myers does it or whatever.
Let's get this party started!
I seriously believe something weird is going on.
As these teens continue to party in their cabin in scenes that, again, feel incredibly authentic to just genuine horror movies. So many of these scenes are like the way these characters interact. This reminded me so much of the Friday the 13th remake from 2009. Yes,
exactly.
There's really similar scenes.
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
As they're doing all this stuff, they're doing a game of Truth or Dare, and they dare Jules to make out with a mounted wolf head. Which, of course, is mounted to be scary. It's mounted to have like a snarl on its face, and it's incredibly stupid. At first, of course, Marty is the one that makes a dare, and he dares her to go make out with that moose. And they're like, "What? This isn't a moose? What are you talking about? It's clearly a wolf." But I like this because you're kind of expecting something to happen with that creepy wolf thing. Mm-hmm. And like, it would be stupid if it did, but you're still expecting that because, again, even in Evil Dead 2, there's a mounted deer head that moves around and laughs at people. And it's like, okay, you're expecting them to do kind of something with that, and they don't do it. Instead, it's just a strange scene with a very attractive woman making out with a mounted wolf head.
Very strange scene.
So while this is going on, we see at the facility now a ton of people are in this security room, and they're all taking bets. And what are they betting on exactly? Apparently, it's to see what will actually kill these teens. You see like the board, and you see it's fun to like pause it and just see some of the weird stuff that's written on there, like weirdly specific.
Yeah.
Hadley, Bradley Whitford, of course, really wants it to be a mermaid. Or merman, excuse me. He bets on a merman like every year, and it's never been a merman once, but he's holding out hope still. And while this is all happening, there's like one security guard in particular who isn't cool with this, and he thinks that it's like, oh, this doesn't really seem like morally acceptable. And they explain to him, you know, they're not actually rigging the game. They rig it just as much as they need to. They try and make everybody dumber, but ultimately whatever ends up killing them will be their own doing. Mm-hmm. And we see exactly how that plays out when the cellar door opens and they all go down into the basement, and they see all these different things, and each one corresponds to something that people were betting on. Chris Hemsworth picks up a ball that has like moving pieces, and it's very clearly like a Hellraiser thing, even though it's a ball and not a cube. And later on, we see they clearly wanted to have Pinhead in this movie, and they just couldn't get the rights to him.
Instead, it was Sawhead, circular Sawhead.
Yeah, he's got like a saw in his head, but it's the exact same like appearance otherwise, and he's holding that thing just like Pinhead on the poster. You see all these other things: doll heads, masks. There's a conch, which I think Holden holds at one point, and
that's gonna call him merman.
when it's revealed what actually is come to kill them. Then they figure out, like, okay, who won? Engineering won or whatever. And then this other intern that also bet on the same thing. It's the redneck zombie torture family, I believe is the phrase.
Yeah.
And like Bradley Whitford is like all bummed out. And then Richard Jenkins goes up to him and he's like, oh man, I'm sorry. And he's like, he had the conch in his hand. Like it was so close to being a merman. Had he just done something with that conch.
I also like that same scene. There's like that other woman who works in the facility and she's like, hey, I had zombie too. And he goes, no, you had zombies. Yeah. They had redneck
torture. Redneck zombie torture family. There's clearly a difference. Like, yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, it was great.
But so they get the redneck zombie torture family, but they specifically get that because Dana starts reading from a diary that she finds of a family that supposedly, the Buckner family that supposedly lived at that house in like 1900. And she's reading all this stuff about the dad like murdering the kids or something. She's like reading all about this. And then she's like, oh, there's more stuff in Latin. Only Marty says it, but he's like, don't read that. I'm drawing the line at the Latin. Like, but she ends up reading it. And I've written it down. This is not correct Latin.
Oh no!
This is shocking to you, I'm sure, as a film viewer who expects attention to detail.
Can you read it? Is it like readable Latin?
I can read it. Well, it is, but here's the thing: they didn't conjugate a damn thing. Every noun is in the nominative. I mean, technically, it can't be translated, but you can tell what they're going for, and in that sense, it could be translated a few ways. And I'm going to pronounce it differently. I stick to the classical pronunciation. V's are W's. Okay, I'm not doing this vivo stuff. That's not a thing. That's modern Latin. Dolor supervivo caro. Dolor sublimos caro. Dolor igneo animus. I could tell what they were saying, even though I could tell it was off. And it should be, and I believe me, I've written this so that it should be correct.
Okay.
Because if it means, as they eventually kind of find out that it means, it's later on it's Holden who's able to read it, which surprises himself because he hasn't read Latin since 10th grade or something, but he is, in this experiment, he is the nerd, the smart guy, so he's made smarter. But dolor supervivo caro, that's pain outlasts the flesh or the body. Dolor sublimos caro, that's pain exceeds the body. I don't remember that one exactly, but dolor igneo animus is that pain ignites the soul.
Ah, okay.
The problem here is dolor and caro are both nominative, thus they're both the subject, so you could also say the body supersedes pain.
Gotcha, okay, yeah.
Because if they're both nominative, but then it doesn't even matter because the verb supervivo is first person, so that's I supersede, but then we're talking third person nouns here, so it doesn't make any sense. Here's what it should be, folks. I know this is what you've come here to listen to.
I'm having a heck of a time, Patrick. Keep reading.
First of all, I mean, word order technically doesn't matter in Latin because the cases and the conjugations and everything. But you're a psychopath if you don't put the verb at the end of the sentence. That's just like a fact. So it should be dolor carnem supervivit, dolor carnem sublimat, dolor animum ignit.
Oh, okay.
Joss Whedon, you listening? I'm okay with you killing a 4-year-old child, but I'm not okay with you butchering this Latin, sir.
I'm okay with you killing a 4-year-old kid. I'm not okay with you murdering the classics.
Exactly. Sean Connery would have gotten this right? He's reading his philosophy and his Shakespeare and. No, this is movie Latin. They never do it right, and it's fine. It's just rare. They don't always dwell on it like long enough for me to actually like write stuff down and figure out, okay, this is the mistake that they made. A lot of times it's just like written on the wall somewhere, and I don't really get a good look at it. So I decided to just make a little game out of that. Joss Whedon, you fraud.
You're the Hans Zimmer of Latin.
Once this Latin is read, bodies rise from the ground outside, and these are, of course, the redneck zombie torture family, the Buckners. Jules and Kurt go outside to have sex. Everyone at the security is watching very, very closely and intently. At this point, it's not as busy a room. and then it's that same security guard, that rookie security guard, is like, is all this necessary? Hadley says something like, you don't understand, this is like how it has to be done, this is the people upstairs want it, demand that it be done this way or something. So again, this is an explanation for why is there so much nudity in stupid ass horror movies, right? But I like that they pump in pheromones into the woods and stuff.
And change the lighting to make it brighter for her. And they also increase the temperature. She's complaining it's too cold. She doesn't want to take her top off.
Yes, so but then they increase the temperature to like 78 degrees or something. Eventually, the redneck zombie torture family shows up. They stab her in the hand. They fight Kurt, and they eventually behead Jules.
And by the way, the dad of the redneck torture family has the coolest weapon, a bear trap on a chain.
Yeah, that was interesting. Genuinely interesting. After Jules is killed, Bradley Whitford goes and pulls some kind of a switch, and we see blood filling in this etching on a stone. So back at the cabin, Marty's frustrated that no one realizes how weird everyone's acting, even Dana. Because Kurt says some dumb jock line about it. He calls Holden an egghead. And he goes why is Kurt acting like that? That guy's a sociology major or something.
Yeah, that's a great line.
Marty goes outside to pee, and we see in the background one of the zombies is the zombie kid approaching him slowly. But then Kurt shows up, and they run inside because they're being attacked by zombies. They barricade the door. In this instance, they're acting correctly. They're okay, we have to stick together. This is what Kurt says. But then over at the facility, they need to make him dumber, so they pump in some dumb gas. And then, seconds after he's okay, we need to stick together, then he goes, wait a second, we should split up. We can cover more ground that way. And then Holden's yeah, I agree. And Marty, again, is the only one who's what? That's a terrible idea. But then... Then the zombies start breaking through, so they all go to their rooms, and then from the facility, they lock their rooms. Marty then finds a camera in the lamp and kind of realizes what's going on. Not fully. He thinks he's on a reality TV show. And he's oh, my mom's going to think I'm such a burnout or something. And at the facility, they're wondering, what? I thought the weed that we gave him was supposed to make him dumb. What's going on? This is clearly not... he's figuring things out too easily, but... It almost doesn't matter because a zombie takes him through the window, drags him around, stabs him in the back, and again, he seemingly dies, though we don't really see him die. We do see, again, blood being emptied into one of those etchings, though. Mm-hmm. Dana and Holden find their way into the cellar, or actually a different room of the cellar. They end up kind of killing a zombie, but, it's a zombie, so not really. They eventually get out. And so does Chris Hemsworth. So the three of them get back in the RV, and they are ready to just drive the hell away when over at the facility they realize that no one has closed off the tunnel. So
this is a great
Richard
scene.
Jenkins is running mad all throughout that office. He's trying to get to engineering, and eventually he's hot wiring it, and the engineering is going, we never got the order, no one told us to do this. He's but he closes it just in time. No, they don't crash. They just, all these rocks just fall down and block everything.
Well, and also I think at this point they're watching the monitors, right? And they realize that the Japanese version isn't going so well.
I think at this point, Japan's going okay. I think it's a little bit later that we see Japan is completely failed. But we do see little glimpses of what's going on in Japan, and it's this creepy ghost girl who looks like she's straight out of The Ring in a classroom full of 9-year-old girls.
Yeah.
We also see little glimpses of other experiments that didn't work out, and these are all references to horror movies. Clearly, there's a dead King Kong.
Yes.
In somewhere in South America, I think. Where was it? Do you remember? There was a castle on fire somewhere.
Yeah.
And there was in Sweden. It looks like it's maybe The Thing.
Oh, that was it.
There's
it was Sweden.
something
it was a thing.
going on. Yeah. I mean, you can't go too crazy, and especially because you can get sued. But I would have liked to see a little bit more of this, because we clearly have Pinhead in this movie. We clearly are doing a Hellraiser thing. We're clearly doing a thing with The Ring.
You know what would have been really cool? If they had made 5 or 6 movies in this universe, and people didn't know it was connected, but it was only at the end of each movie that you got a 10-minute clip of these people in these facilities across the world.
Go full Cloverfield or something.
Yeah. And then in the last half hour or 45 minutes of the 6th movie, that's when you get the whole tie-in, I think that would have been a neat thing.
I think the only way you could do that would be a Netflix thing, like a Fear Street. I don't think you could just do that with 5-6 theatrically released movies.
I agree.
And you can't do it now because Cabin in the Woods is... Well, you don't want to give Joss Whedon any royalties, first of all. But
what if you come out with other ones called Cabin in the Mountains, or Chalet on the Fjord? I don't know.
To a very small extent, this is kind of what Fear Street did, right? Fear Street did a summer camp slasher in the part 2 that was very clearly a Friday the 13th, The Burning, a sleepaway camp, whatever. The first one kind of a Scream, but it really just kind of like a modern suburban slasher, modern 1994. And then the third one, well, famously, they just gave up on the third one, and they just went back to 1994 about halfway through the movie. So they weren't even sold on a 17th century The Witch recreation, but that was what that was kind of supposed to be. But yeah,
which, by the way, audience, if you're looking for a Fear Street commentary track, we have one of those.
Good point on the first one on our Patreon. Yes. Back to the cabin in the woods, or rather this mountainous cave. They're trapped. They don't know what to do. They can see there's like a canyon across to the road, but they can't get there. They don't have any ropes. They can't climb until Chris Hemsworth decides to take a dirt bike and go for the jump. Dana gives him a kiss on the cheek, and he's like, I will, even if I like am limping, I will get police to come back, we'll get choppers, we'll get all this, like, we will get back, we will kill these things, whatever they are. Really dramatic. And then of course he jumps and he hits the force field and falls to his death.
It was a great scene.
I think I would have liked the scene better if he didn't hit a force field and he just came nowhere near to making the jump and just died. And I think I would have liked that a little bit more.
That would have been hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, this is funny, but I think it could have been a little bit better if we just, like, see it and it's, like, in slow motion, it's, like, all dramatic, and then they just cut to a different angle and you see he's, like, 30 feet short of the jump and as he falls to his death. Well, I think that would have been...
The problem with this death is that it becomes brutal. Like, he hits it, the bike kind of, like, sparks up and falls, and then he hits this force field all the way down. Like he's flopping out, and you're like, ugh, that's brutal. Like, all the way down this deep, dark... bottomless chasm.
So the two survivors now, they get back in the RV, and at this point Dana is starting to put some things together, and is like, oh my god, like Marty was onto something. Because Marty had something about like the world is full of puppeteers and we're the puppets things, and she's kind of repeating that now. But Holden is giving this like, don't worry, you know, we'll stick with you. You're all I've got. But then he just gets stabbed in the neck while he's driving because there's a zombie in the RV, and the RV crashes into the lake, with Dana escaping from the zombie and getting back to the dock, and we see over at this facility a huge celebration is occurring, even though she's still alive. And this new security guard is like, wait, why is everyone celebrating? And they're like, well, the Virgin doesn't have to die. As long as she's the last to live, it's okay if she dies. And it's like, okay, so they're doing the final girl thing, obviously. They're all celebrating until they get a phone call from the directress, I guess, or the director, excuse me, telling Bradley Whitford that one of them is actually still alive. It's not done yet. Or another one of them is still alive, I should say. Meanwhile, Dana's being attacked by a zombie on the dock, but she is saved by Marty, who beats the zombie with his thermos bong.
Well, also, now, by this point, though, the Japanese one has failed, right?
So they know they're the only hope, right? And what are they the only hope for? We still don't quite know, but we can probably kind of piece it together at this point.
And now I want to say that there's a great line where when the Japanese one fails, he looks at the screen, he goes, if you, what did he say? He goes, the best things are made in America or something.
Well, I like Richard Jenkins, like, how fucking hard is it to kill 9-year-olds?
Yeah, that was great.
Because it's a complete failure. They don't even have one fatality there.
Yeah, and like all these 9-year-olds are singing and holding hands and like putting the spirit of this ghost in a frog, you know? It's all great.
I like the indication too that there's like cultural differences. This is the American culture where they have to have the slut, the stoner, who they just call the fool. Because you're not going to have a slut in your classroom of 9-year-old Japanese students.
No, exactly, yeah.
Right? It's clearly a different cultural context, so I think that's kind of neat. So Marty takes Dana to where he was attacked by the zombie, and they actually like dig into the grave and find an elevator. And they realize that those zombies, were sent up to attack them. They were sent from this elevator. He also killed a zombie, of course, or again, it's a zombie. It's not fully dead. It's in pieces, though. And as they get into the elevator, the zombie arm falls into the elevator with them. So they get the elevator moving, and they go around, and they see all these different monsters. They see there's like a ghost, some kind of phantom thing. They see Pinhead, who's Sawhead.
They see like little ballerina girl with teethy mouth.
It's Pinhead that makes Dana piece everything together because she recognizes that ball that it's holding.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, we decided what came to get us. Like, we made the decision based on what we interacted with in the basement. We also see a shot that it shows there's like thousands of these rotating elevator things. Mm-hmm. Thousands of monsters, creepy supernatural stuff, including like a giant snake. So eventually the security team is able to find them, and they only send one security guard, which seems like a mistake. They open the elevator, he points the gun at them, but then of course the zombie arm distracts him, thus allowing Marty to kill the guy. Good work, zombie arm. So they find their way into this like main elevator hallway area where there's like 10 elevators that come down to this main room, and they're being shot at by all these other security guards. They get into this room, and Dana realizes that she can give them some time if she releases everything, so she goes full Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Was that the movie at the end of it where the kid just released all the dinosaurs?
I don't know. The last one I saw was the reboot of Jurassic Park. I didn't watch the rest.
It was the second. It was the second of the new ones where the kid at the end of the movie just releases the dinosaurs to the world. She does that here, and it's like immediate. Like all these monsters come out and kill all these people. There's blood everywhere. There's like a giant. There's a giant bat. There's the giant cobra that I mentioned. There's zombies. There's like everything you can imagine.
And
basically,
there's like a robot crab thing with like a saw on its arm, and
there's so much going on in these scenes. You can like watch it again and like, oh, I didn't notice that.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I first saw this, the things that stuck out to me were the cobra stands out because I love snakes, and it's a giant cobra. The bat.
Yeah.
Eventually, we get that merman. Eventually, of course, the merman gets his own.
That might be one of my favorite scenes, if I'm honest.
It's amazing. Yes. There's also a unicorn. We didn't say that. A unicorn stabs a guy
multiple
which
times.
Is really fun.
And it's like the unicorn didn't just stab him once and run away,
it
but he
gores
pulled
him
out and gored him 2 or 3 more times.
Yeah. Does make you wonder how they fit a King Kong in an elevator, though. So our 2 remaining survivors escape. We kind of don't see them for a while because we cut back to the main security room, which is like a vault, and the vault is being banged down by all these monsters inside that are trying to get in. Bradley Whitford is gunning him down with his machine gun. Eventually they get in. The rookie security guard is killed. The woman...
by like an octopus. She's ripped through the ceiling.
Yeah, she's like the last to go here because Bradley Whitford... he gets knocked to the ground, and he's on the ground, and he looks, and he just sees a merman slowly approaching him,
yeah.
And he's just... I don't remember what he says exactly,
he
but
says,
there's like a...
man...
Yeah, there's like a you gotta be kidding me moment, and it's kind of wish fulfillment, but also not, as the merman kills him, and it kills him in amazing... Well, first of all, the merman...
It looks disgusting.
It's a disgusting looking thing. It is. It's kind of flops around. It's very rubbery, which feels great. It's very throwback.
I don't know if I'd call it a merman. It's more like a dolphin man. You know, it's got like a tail that's just flopping around, and it has like a blowhole. So when he's like...
You're right, it has a blowhole.
So when he's eating them, he's shooting all the blood out of this blowhole.
Also, the effects in this movie, I do think that, I mean, this movie has definitely more CGI than I would like to see, but I also understand why that is, because they just have so much crap going on. Mm-hmm. But when they do practical, it works. This merman is awesome. It's really creepy. It's disgusting. It's creative. I don't know if he's the main guy, but one of the effects guy, the makeup effects, special effects guys on this movie is David Leroy Anderson, who worked on a lot of horror movies. I know he did Shocker.
Oh.
David Leroy Anderson also, of course, is married to Heather Langenkamp, who, you know, the star of Nightmare on Elm Street, has a bit of a career as a special effects artist, too, because I think she kind of works with her husband a lot.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
And her name is in the credits on IMDb. So she was involved in maybe the merman, who knows, that's just a lot of fun. She had a cameo in Shocker. I assume she had a cameo because... you know, Shocker, Wes Craven, he's like, hey, buddy, you want to get in this movie and play a dead body? But maybe she had a cameo because she married David Leroy Anderson around that time. She married him in 1989, which is the year Shocker came out.
And the year Sean Connery won Sexiest Man Alive.
Exactly, yeah. So sorry, David Leroy Anderson. Heather Langenkamp really wanted to marry Sean Connery. It just didn't work out. This is definitely not... I mean, it's no The Thing. It's no... one of those like classic practical effects movies, but there's a lot of good practical effects in this movie, though, and I do want to highlight that here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
From this main security room, Richard Jenkins is the only one alive. He slips into the basement, and he gets kind of stabbed accidentally by Dana, who's just kind of running along with a knife. So he dies, and then Dana and Marty stumble into this room with all these big, ancient sacrificial drawings, which these are the etchings that have been covered up in blood. We see all of them are covered in blood except for the Virgin, and you can kind of see what each one's supposed to be. The guy holding a spear is the athlete.
Mm-hmm. The relief with big tits is the whore.
And eventually, the director introduces herself to them, and the director, of course, is Sigourney Weaver. Now,
never heard of her.
I don't want to say this was ruined for me, because it's not like this is a big twist or anything, but it's definitely supposed to be like a reveal. You're like, oh, I had no idea Sigourney Weaver was in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
When I first saw this movie, when they first get off the elevator, and there's like that PA voice, I could tell right away that was Sigourney Weaver's voice. So that was kind of ruined for me. That was not like a big
I feel you on that one.
For me, I'm like, oh, I guess Sigourney Weaver is going to be in this movie at some point when I heard that.
The first time I saw it, I thought, oh, they're using Sigourney Weaver's voice. That's fun. Yeah.
You know, I would compare it a bit to a movie that I know you've seen. I saw it recently for the first time. Bullet Train.
Yes, yeah.
Because he's talking on the phone the entire time with his boss, and I'm like, oh, that's Sandra Bullock.
Yeah.
And then in the last 5 minutes of the movie, Sandra Bullock shows up. It's like, oh, that was probably supposed to be a bit of a... Ed Harris in Snowpiercer is kind of like that, too. You hear his voice throughout the movie, but you don't actually see Ed Harris until, like, the very end. And it's like, oh, but I knew it was Ed Harris.
Yeah, they always pick actors with very distinct voices.
I don't think they do. I think I'm just good at picking that out. I don't know. I don't know, but...
I will be honest, I didn't catch the Sandra Bullock one when I watched Bullet Train the first time.
I don't know. Maybe just those kinds of twists just don't work on me. Maybe my own brain just recognizes voices too well. I don't know. So Sigourney Weaver explains what's going on. They have to sacrifice these people to the ancient gods that used to rule the earth. Otherwise, they will attack and destroy it. We need the fool to die before the virgin. And there's a cute little line like, Dana's like, virgin? And then she's just like, we work with what we have.
Yeah.
Thus implying that in the 21st century, all women are whores and we don't have virgins, right? That's what the joke is. So Dana realizes what's going on, so she pulls the gun and points it at Marty. But then a werewolf attacks her. While the werewolf is attacking her, Marty fights Sigourney Weaver and throws her into this pit, which I guess leads to the elder gods. We haven't said it, but this is a very like Lovecraftian idea thing, really, which makes sense. Joss Whedon would write like a little bit of Lovecraft stuff because like I said, I don't like Joss Whedon. I think he's a prick, and a lot of assholes I know are like really into H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, what's up with that? We know somebody who's very into H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft, also famous asshole, but that's not the reason. I just like know a lot of like weird people who are like, oh yeah, H.P. Lovecraft is the greatest. Someone told me once that I think H.P. Lovecraft is the most important writer of the 20th century, and I'm like,
okay.
T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. He doesn't crack the top 50.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm sorry, he's not a bad writer. It's just like that was, and he's just like, oh, just think of how many things have been inspired by him.
Name 10 things that have been inspired by Lovecraft.
Horror movies. That's what it was. And this guy was into horror movies, so he thought H.P. Lovecraft was more important than James Joyce, I guess. I don't know. It's an insane opinion to have. Don't get me wrong. Anyways, Sigourney Weaver's dead. Marty kills or scares off the werewolf, and the two of them kind of sit there. They're basically dying, or at least she certainly is, because she's been attacked by a werewolf. They share a joint as they discuss. She's like, I'm sorry for almost killing you. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry for almost letting you get killed by a werewolf. And they kind of go back to what he said at the end, like, oh, you know, we could save the world, but kind of going back to what he said and when he was in the RV, maybe the world's not worth saving. Maybe it's better off just to let it all end and let someone else try anew. And so a giant hand emerges, and we see it crushing the cabin, and that is the end of The Cabin in the Woods. Jim, what did you think?
I forgot how much I loved this movie. I forgot how funny it was.
It is a very funny movie.
How dare I say witty it was, and how, what's what I'm looking for, how self-aware, I guess, it was, and how aware of all horror movies and horror movie tropes it was. And I think if you're looking for a movie that pokes fun at all the really dumb, stupid things in horror movies, this is like a perfect movie for that. And just being such a funny comedy that involves a totally weird sub-story about elder gods and an organization that has sprung up around to feed them once a year. It's just great. It's like a breath of fresh air in the horror franchise, if you could call this as part of the horror franchise.
Genre, not don't say.
Sorry, you're right. Genre. My apologies. But yeah, I liked it a lot. How about you?
I like it, but I'm going to push back on your breath of fresh air comment here. I think.
How dare you?
I agree that this is a clever film, a witty film. It's well written. There's really funny stuff. Maybe this is just how my brain is wired. But one thing that really annoys me, because it can be done well. And this is a movie that does it pretty well. But the way people talk about it, like when Scream came out, because this movie is... not going to say it's like inspired by Scream, but it's, you can draw comparisons, right? Mm-hmm. But when Scream came out, people were talking about like, oh, the horror movies, slasher movies were just so dead and stale and all this, and Scream was a breath of fresh air. That's what critics said. That's what horror movie fans said. To me, at this point, the meta horror is almost as played out as just regular, boring, kind of by the numbers horror was when Scream came out.
Yeah.
And I mean, a caveat here being Cabin in the Woods is 11 or 12 years old. So, maybe we can't blame it for that. But, like, at this point, if I see, like, an advertisement for, like, a horror movie or, like, a slasher movie, and I see that it's going to be this thing where it's like a self-aware thing, I'm just like, oh, God, another one of those. Like, we don't... If there's one genre that doesn't need more kind of parodies... it's horror, because that's been done to death. That having been said, I think this movie does a pretty good job of that, but at the same time, the most of what I really appreciated about it, or most of what I got out of the comedy, wasn't so much like what it was doing with the horror tropes, and like, I mean, I pointed out a lot of that stuff because it's you got to mention it, obviously, with Cabin in the Woods. But to me, the really funny stuff is just the contrast of the boring, everyday office workers who are witness to this like horror movie scenario. To me, that is what's really funny about it and what's really fresh and kind of different. I said this earlier. I think this movie works a lot better as a comedy than a horror movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. Like, I do find like most of the horror kind of... I don't want to say by the numbers because that's kind of what it's trying to be, but I find most of the horror stuff, like at the cabin, kind of underwhelming. I didn't really like how some of it was shot, especially because we made such a point of establishing that the characters over at the office have the ability to change the lighting. I found it really frustrating how dark it was when the redneck zombie torture family was attacking.
It was hard to see their makeup and the effects on them and stuff, I found.
Like when the zombies are attacking him in the house. I find all that, like, just, I guess, underwhelming. I mean, I understand why it's by the numbers, but I still, like, hoping to kind of get something out of that. To me, basically the story for the main characters, the teens, starts when they get to the elevator.
Yes.
The stuff I really enjoy is seeing Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins. I love their little celebratory dance thing that they do. That makes for a great gif. And then once Marty and Dana get to the elevator and all hell breaks loose, then I like it. I'm on board for all of that, even though it's a little too CG, a little too, a little more chaotic than stuff that I usually like. Like, I liked all that stuff. I like the movie, but I don't love it, and to me anyways, it's not the breath of fresh air that I guess you say it is.
Well, it's funny because I agree with all the things that you like about the movie, but coming from somebody who doesn't really watch horror movies, like only for this podcast, really, like I rarely go to the theaters and see a horror movie. After sitting through so many dumb fucking horror movies, either for this podcast...
We've watched our share.
Exactly, yeah. So, like, after sitting through so many for either this podcast or on my own or with friends at a theater or whatever,
you've watched Spookies now 5 or 6 times.
I do love Spookies, though.
Imagine if they sent the Catman as one of the monsters. Like I said earlier, they clearly do a Hellraiser thing. There's a very small reference to King Kong. They could have dug up like all these obscure. I mean, imagine if they dug up like all these obscure horror movies from like the 80s, like movies that were like.
What if they set the Ghoulies?
Well, the Ghoulies at least have a little bit of clout. I'm thinking more like, who is too destitute to even sue us if we rip them off? And I'm thinking, can we get a Spookies in there? Can we get a Demon Wind or something?
But I'd prefer an Exploding Grim Reaper.
Oh yeah, Exploding Grim Reaper, and that wouldn't even. I mean, that wouldn't even have to be a Spookies because it's just a Grim Reaper, right? But then maybe he could explode at some point in the movie, and that would be a little, for those that know.
A little nod to
But
Spookies.
then again, I'm not saying Joss Whedon, Drew Goddard don't know anything about horror movies or anything. They clearly know something, but I have no reason to believe they know what the fuck Spookies is, I mean,
No,
Spookies
exactly.
is a deep cut,
Yeah. And, and kind of building off that point when you were saying...
The farting zombies, they could have done the farting zombies.
The Muckmen. Building off what you were saying about Joss Whedon and who was it, Drew Goddard?
Drew Goddard, yeah.
They don't really know much about horror movies, and that's kind of...
No, I'm not. I'm saying they don't know some of the obscure shit that I know. I'm not saying they don't know horror movies.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So they don't know the obscure shit, and obviously they know...
Probably not, anyways.
Horror movies. But I think, interestingly enough, I feel like this movie was kind of made for people like me who don't really give a shit about horror movies and want to see something a little different,
so. I think a lot of like horror fans genuinely like it too, and I mean I like it, but I think when Scream came out, I think Scream was kind of a horror movie maybe for a lot of people that thought horror movies were kind of stupid.
Mm-hmm.
It was also in some ways kind of a love letter to horror movies, which this movie kind of is too.
Yeah. But like a love letter scribbled in crayon or something, like
love letter written in the blood of a 4-year-old that Joss Whedon
allegedly.
Yeah, I think this movie is more for a non-horror fan than it is for a horror fan. But that's there's a Venn diagram of who this movie appeals to. It's not two completely different circles.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So all that having been said, which of these two movies do you prefer, The Rock or The Cabin in the Woods?
Patrick, this is a tough one.
It's tough for me too. I'm not gonna lie. This was not easy. Because I don't love either of these movies. I like them both. I would probably give them the same score on Letterboxd.
I would say, because really I only had one gripe with The Rock, and it was too long.
Is that we didn't see Sean Connery nude?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want to see that sexiest man alive's penis.
He's in the shower. I mean, we could have done it.
Oh, yeah. But no, the Rock was too long. It was like 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that.
It was, but I when I put it in, it said like 2 hours, 15 minutes, and I'm like, oh, fuck. But it was more like 2 hours and 5 minutes. Like before credits, I think it was closer to 2 hours than 2 hours 15.
Yeah, whereas The Cabin in the Woods was like an hour 30. That was like a perfect length for that movie, and The Rock I felt was a little too long just because they had some repeat story beats and more headache-inducing camera work. So I'm gonna say just because of that, I'm gonna go with Cabin in the Woods, but I still love The Rock with my whole heart. So how about you?
Well, it can't get much closer. So I am going to go off of a really, really, really specific and stupid and downright unfair way to choose between them. In both instances, I offered something that could have been added to the movie. Which one angers me more that they didn't do this opportunity? Okay? No farting zombies or no spookies of any kind in The Cabin in the Woods. Also, I would have done that Chris Hemsworth on the dirt bike joke a little differently. I still think it worked, though.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Sean Connery being English line. That is just such a blatant, unforgivable misfire to not give him an opportunity to say, I'm Scottish, you bastard, or something like that. I think that's the more offensive thing that they missed. So I'm going to say I slightly prefer Cabin in the Woods for that stupid reason alone. I could vote for The Rock because the Latin insulted me in The Cabin in the Woods, except guess what? You can explain that as like, this is a stupid horror movie that these people are in. The Latin's not going to be correct. it kind of annoyed me just because that's a niche interest of mine. I studied Latin for years, but it's perfectly explainable within the context of the film. So I've also studied Sean Connery for years. I know he's not English. So, Jim, how do you think this stacks up as a drive-in double feature? We've got action classic, modern horror comedy classic. How does it work?
I actually think this works really well. I like how we have the loud, stupid The Rock, and we have the sexiest man alive of 1989, and
sexiest man of 2014 when Chris Hemsworth,
exactly, yeah.
Year was it?
And I also love that though Michael Bay isn't making fun of the action genre, the movie itself kind of makes fun of the action genre because there's so many tropes in
Michael Bay himself is kind of he's such an easy person to make fun of, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. But like The Rock is like this big, stupid, dumb action movie that is so much like so many other action movies that it kind of just makes fun of itself, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then you go to The Cabin in the Woods, where again, yeah, you have Chris Hemsworth, Sexiest Man Alive 2014. You have a movie that is knowingly making fun of itself. It's very aware of itself and what it's trying to be. And it's also very aware of the horror genre that has come before it. And it's also a hilarious movie. And it's also over the top and bombastic in like the last 15, 20 minutes, which is great. And I think that's a great pairing. But how about you?
I'm going to agree with just about everything you said. You do get this kind of a cliche-filled, kind of somewhat by-the-numbers action film. And then we get a by-the-numbers horror film, but it's beyond by-the-numbers because the point is that the horror aspects of this movie are by-the-numbers. So I think there's like this weird creative energy in The Cabin in the Woods that The Rock doesn't have, but I think that balancing the two, you kind of go from normal, kind of traditional by-the-numbers movie to kind of like postmodern all of a sudden. This is a fun pairing. And I like the order. The Rock comes first, Cabin in the Woods to follow it. I think it works.
Yeah, I totally agree. Dare I say, Patrick, this might be one of our best pairings.
Oh, you see, I'm not going that far.
I'd say top 10. Maybe.
It also sounds like you
like
like both of these movies more than I like them.
I do.
It's going to be different for you because of that.
I do. Well, The Rock is very close to my heart, and I also forgot how much I enjoy.
You know what else is close to your heart? That knife that Nicolas Cage stuck in it.
The needle?
I thought it was a knife.
No,
they said needle, but it looks like a knife.
Well, in the movie, like
it's a big ass needle.
Are you talking about at the end when he pulls it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a needle, but they fucking give it like a knife sound effect. It goes whooshing. It's just a needle.
I would say it's a big ass needle. Okay, it's like an unsheathing.
Yeah.
You hear armor being pierced.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so here's what we've got going on next week. We've got Saw 3, and we've got a film that I know nothing about, The Angry Red Planet from 1959. I guess it's 50s sci-fi. I'm assuming it involves Mars. And the poster, it looks like it's like a giant spider or giant bug creature of some kind, but who knows? The monster may be nothing like that in the actual movie, so I really genuinely have no idea about that movie. I've of course seen Saw 3 a few times. I think I own it on Blu-ray, so I am looking forward to that double feature, Jim, and I hope you are as well.
Always, Patrick, always.
And audience, I hope the same is true for you, because we will catch you next week on Revenge of the Drive-In.